back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says. I'm the president and CEO of Design 2147, Code and Zoning Expediters here in New York City and in the tri-state area. Today I have a special guest from our own firm, Tony Agati.
Hello, everyone.
Tony, welcome aboard.
How you doing, Sisto? Good.
So just a quick story about Tony. Tony's been with Design for a long time now.
14 years.
14 years. So I'm 37. You're here 14. You're a third of the way, Tony. But Tony is our code and zoning specialist. I call him the Pope.
The Code Pope.
The Code Pope.
That's right.
When you need to know something, you go to Tony.
I put on my special hat.
Yeah, he puts on his coding hat because you need to, to dive into the code and zoning, you need a certain character and personality, which was definitely not me. When I started this business, I knew that I wasn't going to read law. That's why I have Sergio and Dom as partners. And over time, we had a vision of creating a code and zoning department about 14 years ago. And Tony's been here since the onset. So, Tony, thank you for all of your dedication and helping build our brand of being premier code and zoning experts here in New York City. So you're here to talk about the code. And one of the main reasons that you're here is that our podcast is about giving people information, but it's also about how difficult it is to navigate through New York City.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. So when we talked offline about what our topic was going to be today is, the $1 million question in New York City that people always ask me, and I defer them to you, is, so which code should I use?
Right.
And
well, just the fact that there's more than one code.
right. And well, not only is there more than one code, but it dates way back to the early 1900s.
Oh, yeah.
And there are buildings that still, we use those codes.
Yeah.
And I know that people probably go, that's
There was an
impossible.
1896 code.
Right. So Tony, I'm going to make believe I'm one of our developers, and they call you up and they say, I own a building in the city. And,
Great.
my architect wants to know which code should I use. So, take us down this path. First of all, tell us a little bit about your background before you came to design.
Sure.
In the architectural field, working for different architects, and then eventually finding your landing spot here. Hopefully,
Well, so now they don't have to tell them. You just told them.
Well,
right?
I didn't tell you. I told them nothing. I told them that you were in the architectural field.
Right. I mean, obviously, I worked for architects doing a lot of drawings and the grunt work and designing buildings and all that for years. Before I specified into code and zoning when I came here, right? Back in 2008, when everything collapsed, the company I was working for, which was a big architectural firm, actually closed shop, right? So I was looking for a job, and I said, well, these guys are looking for some help with code and zoning, so I came, and it just grew. We realized that there was a huge need for this type of a service.
Right, and
that's,
support.
Yeah, and support, right?
Right.
To help support
Supporting
all of the
architects,
managers,
developers,
right? Everybody,
anyone in the
right.
construction field comes to us with some sort of question.
So, and the best thing now is I never have to go and get my shoes dirty in the field, right? So basically,
But it also
that's
takes
how
a
I wound up
certain
here,
personality to want to read that stuff and write about it and interpret it and be willing to put their neck on the line in terms of an interpretation. And one of the things on this show that we always talk about is, you could read something, but it's the way you see it and the way the person on the other end who's interpreting at the city may...
And the building department, the building department sometimes doesn't see things the same way.
Right.
That's
And we could read the same. We could read the same section in the same passage and get three different views. Me, you, Dom, and Sergio.
Yeah, well, that's the problem with words, right?
Right.
If they wrote the code in math, it'd be easy, right? We'd know exactly. We'd know exactly what it was.
Right.
So getting back to the original question, which was, somebody comes to me and says, I have a building, right? We want to do X to it. What code do we use? So that's a very important question because the very first thing you have to do is understand how that building got there, right?
What was its path?
Right. When was it built, right? What code was it built under? What has been done to it to this point?
Right.
Does it have a certificate of occupancy? What code was that certificate issued under? So those are all very important questions to answer before you decide what code to use or even can use to alter a building. And that's where it gets complicated, right? Because as we know, New York City Building Department has not adopted an existing buildings code yet,
Right.
which we're hoping will happen soon.
Right, which is amazing.
Yeah, and as I understand, in 2008, when they adopted the first international building code,
Yep.
I was speaking with James Colgate at one of the seminars for training, and we talked about the existing buildings code. And James told me then, and it's still true today, that they are waiting for New York State to amend the multiple dwelling law to allow New York City to issue variances. And so there have been several actions that went through the Senate and went through the Assembly, and they went to the Housing Committee and died. So I personally feel that that's what we're waiting for.
Right, and that's, that's a great part. So we'll segue into a hot topic right now, which is
Okay.
office to residential conversion.
Great,
So your
yeah.
colleague Lauren was on. We talked a little bit about it.
Okay.
Lou Madigan was on. We talked to him about it.
Oh, Lou.
David West was on. We talked to him
Great.
about it.
It's a very hot topic right now.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and all great subject matter experts. And we talked to different people in different sections of our construction world about the multiple dwelling law. And to give away my time, 37 years in the business, I worked with Article 7B years and
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
And today we open that same book. It's
We're
the
still
same
using it.
exact
Yeah.
place. There's no revisions to it.
Here's a law from the 1920s that we still use today.
Right, I say it's from the 60s. It's from the 20s, but
Yeah.
but when zoning came in, then it really that section
true.
really applied more,
That's
right?
true.
Because we went from commercial to residence, and so now we have this office to residential conversion, and there are people that are buying it, and we have a job right now in Midtown.
Yes.
That you're working on.
That's correct.
Personally,
That's correct.
and the law is antiquated.
Oh yeah, it is. It truly is. And there have been many committees up in New York State looking at that law, trying to figure out, are there better ways to provide light and ventilation to habitable rooms, right? So right now, if you have a commercial office building that is built to the tax lot lines, you have no rear yard, you have no side yards.
You have nothing.
The only way to get light and air into habitable rooms, meaning sleeping rooms, is you have to lop off a huge piece of your building, right?
Or put,
It's very
or put
expensive.
some kind of core.
Right, or drill out a big core out of the middle of the building so that you can get light and ventilation.
Well, and the thing that's really it's sad, but yet you can see everyone in the world has a phone in their pocket, right? But yet we're looking at a law from 1920 with all the technology today, with all previous show, carbon neutrality, local law 97, how to get lighting better, how to get fuel burning better, get all these things better, but yet we're using a law that's 100
No, you want to laugh, right? So because the building department said, "Oh, you have to comply with the MDL XYZ," right?
Right.
I said, "Okay, so that means I have to put 3/8 inch of asbestos on my kitchen, on the cabinetry next to my stove, right?
Right.
Because that's in there too.
It's still there.
You're picking and choosing which sections you
Right.
want to enforce.
And I clearly remember that one of the guests said, without really naming any names, said, in government, things take time.
Oh, a lot of time.
A lot of time. So, here we are. We put it out there that office to residential conversion is something the city wants. Zoning is allowing us to do it. But yet, they put that out there. We have millions of square feet of vacant office
Article 1,
buildings.
Chapter 5 conversions. I mean, the zoning is all set up for this already.
It was set up years ago for this.
But zoning just sends you to the multiple dwelling law, section 277.7 for light and air, and that's the old part. That's
the
what
old
needs
part.
to be updated.
So here we are. Now we have it. But when they did the zoning change, they should have did the multiple dwelling change. I'm just saying in general.
Oh, yeah.
If they would have matched each other, we'd have a lot more progress.
Yeah.
So now we have a lot of developers that are looking, but they're scratching their head. And, Lou Madigan said it best. He goes, if you want to be a pioneer, you got to dive into it.
No, it's
and you got to
true.
figure it out.
That's
He
right.
goes, you're going to do one, and either you're going to make
fight your
money
way
or you're
through
going to,
it.
you're going to make money or lose money. But we're going to know where we stand on
That's
this.
right, that's
and
right.
I've always given Lou a lot of credit for that because I think
Yeah, he's
is
taking the initiative.
He
Yeah,
is, and he's
absolutely.
definitely a pioneer.
Especially on this project,
So,
yeah.
So give us a couple of things right now that on that front, on the office to residential conversion, what seems to be the biggest sticking point? It is light and air.
Yeah, it's still light and air. Most of the buildings that you're converting, these commercial buildings under Article 7B, they're built right up to the tax lot
because
line.
they were 100 by 100 or-
You're next to a 3-story building, right? Okay, so I want to use that side lot line windows for light and air. You can't.
Right.
The way that the building department has set up, they have a bulletin regarding light and air, and the building code right now says I can take the light and air legally. I can have an easement for light and air over that adjacent property, but it has to be on my zoning lot.
Right.
Well,
Now-
what if that's already part of some other huge zoning lot?
Right.
How do you do this, right? So then, but one thing that is good is that the only variance that New York City is allowed to give in the multiple dwelling law is from 277, right? So you can still approach the building department and request a variance of the multiple dwelling law, section 277, and ask for a light and air easement over the neighboring building,
Right.
even if it's
But
not
they're
on your zoning
difficult to
line.
get.
No, again, that's what we're talking about. That's
Right.
the kind of trailblazing thing that we're doing, right?
Right.
It's not impossible. They are given.
Well, of course. Well, again, it's not carte blanche.
Well, that's the problem,
That's-
right? There's no, I just have to check this box, and there you go, I've
and,
got
and
it.
every
right? Yeah.
and as we know, Tony, in your field, especially when customers and clients come to design, is that not every situation is the same.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a foundation of applying the principles of what the intent of that section is.
Yes.
And then coming up with something that's equal or better in terms of being safe for the
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
building
yeah,
department
yeah.
to accept
Well,
it.
and that brings up another interesting point, because the way that the building codes now are set up, right? So whenever you go to alter an existing building, you have to start in the 2022 administrative code.
Correct, and find out where you fall.
Right. So, and there's a section 28-101.4.3. I cite it 14 times a day that allows the
good.
optional, at least 14, the optional use of the prior codes,
Right.
meaning the 68 code, or when the 68 code allows, the 1938 building
Right,
code.
so you could go from code to code to code.
That's right. So you can continue to step back through the code. So,
If you meet the,
right.
the
So
criteria.
for your typical office building conversion to residential, it doesn't have to be a 2022 code building. It could be a 1968 code building, or even a 1938 code building. And this is the important part.
Well, how many of those did we do that were old warehouses, that were
Yes.
loft buildings, that were
That's
from
right.
the 30s and 40s?
That's right.
A ton of them.
But the caveat is that when you do that, you still have to provide accessibility in
Right.
compliance with the new codes, fire prevention
Right,
in
and all
compliance
the
with the new
mechanical,
codes,
the structural-
as a building hereafter erected, right?
Right.
They want you to provide. I mean, and that makes perfect sense,
Perfect
right?
sense. Why would you put antiquated systems in
Right,
it?
you're
You'd
not going to
spend
put a
all the money to
1938
renovate
code
it. Right.
standpipe system in
Right,
this
of course not.
high-rise building that you just renovated. Right, exactly.
And the laws keep changing, and especially now, a big part of what we talked about is, even zoning's taken in carbon neutrality. Everything we're talking about
right. You
has to
get
do.
floor area deductions for exterior wall envelopes and all
Right.
sorts of things now. Absolutely.
And that's what David was talking about a couple episodes ago. So so here we are. No matter where we go, local law 97 comes into play. Everybody's
away
talking
from
about it. We just spent an episode with Ken Willie on it from KOW Building Consultants, and he gave us like a dry run of what's happening in 2024, what's going to happen in 2030, and what has to happen in 2050. And the numbers are pretty staggering. In New York
yeah.
City, once you take all the exemptions out, all the city-owned buildings, all of the religious places, there's still 50,000 buildings that have to comply.
Oh,
And it's a huge number, and the numbers to make it happen. If 14, he gave us some projections that if 14,000 buildings complied by 2030, the city would levy penalties in the range of somewhere around $900 million.
Wow.
The numbers are astronomical. So there's an incentive for you as an owner to do what you need to do to get your building to to be your carbon efficient.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
And again, so
Well, and again, it becomes more difficult, right, when you're talking about a city that has so many buildings that are 100 plus years old.
Oh, God.
Right? These things were never designed for energy efficiency. They had coal burning furnaces and all sorts of things.
the main thing that they talk about
Exterior
is
walls
is,
with no insulation.
Right, like he said basically what you're trying to do is create a passive house where you're not bringing anything from the outside. You're doing everything from the inside. You're trying to put fans in there to make the air changes that make it healthy and safe.
Yeah.
But in reality, you're taking buildings that would never had a concept of being passive into a passive
Right,
building.
right. You're trying to recover heat and all of these things. Yeah.
You know, it's so my question to you is, as a company, are we fielding a lot of those calls today?
We are. Again, the calls come in, but Local Law 97, isn't an area that we necessarily specialize in.
Correct.
We could definitely use more education regarding 97. I ordinarily will send people to look at certain websites that have information about Local Law
like
97.
the calculators. But what I'm saying is that it seems like there's a buzz about it because of people. You know, a lot of building owners are concerned.
Oh, sure. I mean,
Because
if you weren't
they
even
need to
planning on altering your building, now all of a sudden you have to alter it.
Right, and you got to fund it, you got to do it, you got to schedule it, you got to get engineers. Some portions may even need to be filed with the building department if you're doing removing your whole facade.
It
and
reminds
putting
me
up a
of
new
the
one.
retroactive requirements for sprinklers. Remember when that happened, right? So all of a sudden now you had to put sprinklers in these office buildings. People were like, what? By when? By 2004, I have to have my whole building sprinklered? How am I going to do this? Or how am I going to pay for it? Well, it's the same thing, but now we're talking about, energy efficient mechanical equipment and other support systems like that. Right?
Absolutely. So I'm going to put you on the spot as always. You know?
Sure.
It's always an
Why
opinion.
not?
So
It's not like I can leave, right?
No.
Okay.
No, you can't. You're on the clock. So if I were to ask you one general question, in the code and zoning world right now, what do you think the hottest topic is that people call design about, or not really that you're providing specific code and zoning, but it seems to be the narrative in the industry?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question because, things come in phases, right? So you may answer a question for one client, and then you'll answer that same question 3 times during that week.
Correct.
And then the next week, it's another question. It's another hot topic, right? So when they first adopted the 2022 code in September, when that came into effect, all the questions were about, 2022 code, do I have to comply or don't I have to comply, right? I'm just trying to think. A hot topic right now is fire service access elevator water intrusion into the elevator shaft.
And that's part of the change in the 2022, putting the.
It was actually in the 2014 code, but it was missed by a lot of plan examiners. So this is very interesting too, because a lot of buildings went up with no thought to how to prevent water from entering the fire service access elevator shaft, and plan examiners weren't checking for it. And then all of a sudden, you go for your TCO walkthrough, and they're like, "Oh, you don't have a drain here."
Right.
And people are having to retrofit their buildings, and so actually, the building department hasn't released it yet, but there's a draft bulletin about how to provide water intrusion protection for fire service access elevators. Wow. What they will and won't accept. The sloping floors, no. Trench drains, yes, right?
So trench drains seems to be, I've gotten a few calls on it.
I mean, I have the cut sheet for the trench drain like on my desktop because I just send it to so many people. I'm like, this is what they'll accept. This is what they'll accept, right?
Wow. So that's something that when Lauren Babiak of our office, your colleague, has been doing the lunch and learns, that seems to be a comment that, hey, we're getting a change order to put these drains in. Should we approve it? What's your take on it? What's the city?
Yeah.
And the answer is absolutely. Right. So clearly on the 2022 code, Lauren came in and talked to us about some of the highlights. I know adjoining protection on properties is a big topic. That's really come to the forefront.
Sure.
That everyone's concerned with, hey, I'm building this building,
but
construction
safety, right?
Construction
Rooftop protection and all these things.
And the sidewalk sheds. We have
the new sidewalk sheds.
The new sidewalk sheds are great.
Yeah,
I love it. I was I was on Fifth Avenue yesterday with a client, and we went out for lunch. And you get to look up and you see, it's finally when you're in Europe, you see these things, and we had these antiquated sheds that look like something. When I started in 1987, we were still using the same kind of sheds.
Well, and I actually had a design for a sidewalk shed, but I never got to submit it, so I feel like I missed out. My design probably would have won. Just saying.
I'm just saying. You're the Pope. Of course, it would have won. All the Cardinals would have accepted it. So as we move along, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from the building department about changes that'll be coming out pretty soon. I mean, you just talked about a draft bulletin about trench drains. I mean, what else have you heard recently? I mean, local law 97 obviously is getting a lot of publicity.
I mean, right now everybody's hot and heavy with trying to understand and incorporate the 2022 building code, right? Because most of the projects and applications that are being filed right now are all 2022. So
Prior to.
So it's a big topic right now. Everyone's like, oh wait, that used to be in this section. Now it's over here. Now and they changed the way this is done. And so there's quite a few things. One of the big changes was, and I'm sure Lauren probably spoke about this too,
that's fine.
Residential amenities, right? We've always been struggling with the codes and new building that provides, say, a floor of residential amenities, right? So is it R2 occupancy? Is it B occupancy?
Right.
Is it A2 occupancy? Is it A3 occupancy?
Because it's accessory to the
Right.
residential.
What is it, right? So the building code now has set forth a bunch of rules that you can follow depending upon the occupancy of the floor, how much of the floor is amenity and how much
of it
isn't.
right.
If the whole floor is amenity, there is a path to follow there.
Wow. And if it's partial?
If it's partial, if it's a percentage, if it's 10%, right? So,
wow.
So they did give that some thought. So kudos to the building department for working through that.
Yeah, one of the questions that keeps coming up that I'm concerned with personally, as well as, it's all over the news, is what are we going to do with these electric bikes in apartments?
Oh, yeah. Well,
That's
the battery's a big problem, right?
Problem.
I know.
It's a big and again, you think of it in a very simple way, but it gets very complicated.
Well,
so you're in an apartment house, which I grew up in Queens, and I lived in a 1 and 2 family house, but my friends lived in apartments.
Sure.
And we all took our Schwinn bikes and we put them on our shoulder and we carried
them up the stairs. Yeah,
put them in our
put
them in our apartment.
You probably had a hanger. I had a hanger, right? So
Ivan of our office to this day still has his regular bike in his apartment.
Right.
Puts it on the elevator.
But now we have e-bikes. People are bringing these e-bikes into their apartments.
These e-bikes and
with the lithium batteries.
And we're having fires all over the place.
Yeah.
We're overloading the circuits where the batteries are not they're not really controlled.
Well, I think the problem with the batteries is that it's the manufacturing,
Correct.
right? So
we don't know where
they're coming from,
we don't know where they're buying them. We don't know where
That's
they're getting
right.
tested. So do you think that the multiple dwelling law, because a lot of them are happening in apartment buildings, I truly believe the fire department and the city are going to have to, find a way to say, look, you can't charge the batteries or the bikes in the apartments. There has to be specific
like we have
places.
a bike room requirement right now.
Storage,
but
wasn't
now
really
there might be an e-bike storage room that has some 3-hour
with
fire
electrical
protection
codes, with
or
fire
some,
safety
like they do
codes.
for the trash storage rooms, right? The compactor rooms, right? So there's a
But
rated
again,
enclosure.
it's going to affect the electrical code. It's going to affect the architectural code in terms of what the ratings are for the rooms. It could have,
Well, and just even to take it further than that, the e-bikes, but there's a lot of e-vehicles now, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to have e-vehicle storage in parking garages in these buildings.
Well,
right?
it's funny. It's funny you brought that up. That one of the things that I had read is a lot of parking garage companies have been coming to design, and they're coming to us to say, look, we need to file our annual inspection report. We have an engineer, we have this, but by the way, we need to do repairs. No problem.
Sure.
So we take their plans. We're doing cutting the rebar out, doing concrete. So we're filing their plans, and we've got quite a few jobs like that. But what was very interesting is one of the gentlemen that I spoke to about it, he says, well, part of the problem is cars are getting heavier. I'm like, heavier?
Interesting.
What are you talking about?
I thought they were getting smaller, but
right.
The batteries are heavy. Yeah.
The batteries are heavy.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is not only that, but there's more vans that are electric. They're done with a lot of batteries versus a little car with a little battery.
Sure.
So the weight of the vehicle has actually we were
Increased.
getting lighter because we needed fuel efficiency.
Right.
Well, now we don't need fuel efficiency. We need these batteries.
We need the
these
batteries to
electric
be
motors.
more efficient.
And one guy that I talked to about it was quite interesting. Said the same thing. He goes, "You ever think about you go into some of these old warehouses? That electric motor has been in that elevator for 100 years.
Oh, yeah.
They just don't break down."
true.
He goes, and so cars won't break down like they used to. The batteries might break down.
Yeah, sure.
But the motors aren't going to break down.
Right.
It's just pretty much forward and reverse. That's it.
right.
The motor's turning this way or it's
A
turning that way.
DC brushless motor, and it'll just keep going forever and
Goes
ever and
forever.
ever.
So one of the things that they said that has a lot to do with it is, is the code going to change that when you do a parking garage, the live load versus the dead load is going to increase because the weight of the vehicles is more. And you don't think about it until a catastrophe happens.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, too, because I'm curious now to know if IBC is contemplating that, right? Because our codes are based on the International Building Code. So
Finally.
I
Thank the Lord.
But remember, don't forget,
We still have a redacted version.
Well, and we're working off of the 2015 IBC,
Right.
so we're already, quite a
Behind.
few years behind. But
Right,
it
but
just
at
takes a long
least
time.
we're on the same field as the rest of the world.
That's right.
At least that's why our firm now
Right.
is doing work outside of New York City. We have the jobs in New Jersey and in Connecticut and Westchester and upstate New York because we're getting to use the IBC
Well, and
code.
this is another reason why I'm bringing this all the way back to the beginning of the conversation about the
Which code do I use?
existing buildings code,
Right.
right?
We need it.
An existing buildings code, you simply, if you have a prior code building or existing building, you open that code and say, what am I doing? Am I changing the occupancy? Am I altering
Right.
it? What am I doing?
There's more of a
And
direct
it
path.
sends you to sections of the regular code, the 2022 code in that case, and compliance is required
Versus
there.
now where we start here and then we keep...
No, we go to the 1968 code, which is 50 plus years old, right?
Right.
60 plus years old, and then in the 68 code, you could go back to the 38 code,
It's crazy.
and you can still use these codes to alter buildings. So it's a system that is it's scary.
Well, and
is.
that's why people like yourself who have a passion for it, which you do. David West said. David West said the same thing. You need to be cut from a particular cloth to
True.
enjoy it.
It's true.
And it's challenging. It's something new every day. Someone else will call you with a different idea or a different concept, and you try to find a way to make the law that turns in to read the law to make it plausible for them to make it through their design.
I have this conversation every week with at least one client. I said, just because you can do that, is that really what you want to do? Right? Do you feel that that is the best thing to do? Right? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should.
Right. And also I think that, we always said, when I went to college, when I was in architectural school, you visual, I always wanted to be a designer. I always wanted to do this. And in reality, we are that. What we do is take the law and say, hey, you can't have this door here. It needs to be there. Now they say, oh, but Tony, we don't like the way it looks. Can you give me some other options?
Right.
And that's where Tony gets to take the law option out.
I mean, I love. I don't
and
design.
put his designer hat on.
I don't design one building. I design 100 parts of buildings, right?
So at that
it's
point,
true,
they're not only asking Tony Agati for his interpretation of the law, but now they're like, oh, Tony, I'm kind of stuck.
How can we make this work?
How can we make this work? And then you're able to, in simple ways, take a little pencil and a little sketch and say, well, did you ever think about making a nook here? Did you ever think about moving the door to here? Did you ever think about putting a wall here, a fire shutter, or this or that? And all of a sudden, Tony's part of the design. And design is part of the design.
That's right.
And that's why we
It's in our name.
Right, and that's why we chose it. Because we just didn't want to be New York City building permits. We didn't want to be New York City code consultants. We wanted to be part of the design. Because we were all studied architecture.
One of the things that separate us from some of our competitors, I'm not going to lump them all in because some of them are actually good. A client asks, what is the rating of this wall? What fire rating does this wall have to have? And others will say 2 hours. I will say 2 hours because this is the section, this is the condition.
Right, section and
I want
verse.
to be able to educate the client also about why it's 2 hours, not just tell them it's 2 hours.
Not just because Tony thought it was 2 hours.
That's right.
Right, and that's that's one of the things that we always prided ourselves on is that not just to dictate what it is, but why. And the why is where the devil's in the details, right? Why do I need, and clients will say, but I don't want to do that. And we're like, well, okay, well, if you don't want to do that, what do you have
Right.
in mind?
Well,
it can't be nothing.
We always talk about alternatives. You could do this, right? This is the easy way to comply, but maybe this will work for you also, too. And that's one of the questions with the code, too. Say I have a prior code building. I'm going to alter it under the 1968 building code. Great. 28-101.4.3, there's 20 exceptions, go.
Right.
But you could alter it under the 2022 code.
Correct.
And that might work better for you because
Right.
the 2022
'Cause
code offers you
because there's
this.
so many options.
That's right. Maybe you want an open stair instead of a 2-hour rated stair enclosure with doors at the top and bottom.
Right.
Right.
So Tony, first of all, I know you traveled a long way to be on the podcast,
Sure.
so thank you very much. We truly appreciate it. I can honestly say for myself, Sergio and Dominic, thank you for your dedication to design. You've created our brand. You've put us at the elite level, and we thank you for that.
Thank you.
But I always put everybody on the spot before they leave our show. That's part of what I do.
You're not
and
going
it's
to ask me
always-
if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be, right? Barbara Walters?
That'd be too easy. But I always ask our guests as we leave that, one of my MOs is from my good friend Andrew Peters from Curry and Brown, is I like to look forward. I don't like to look in the rearview mirror. So we always, part of the show is to get our guests to come back in the near future. And some of them made some pretty bold predictions. Can't wait to see if they're going to work out or they're not. So I'd like to put you on the spot about where you think the multiple dwelling law will be in a year from now. So if I said to Tony, "Hey, Tone, next August, do you think that we're going to get some changes to it? Do you think that it's going to help the office to residential conversion as well as other parts of the multiple? Because I just don't want to hone in on that. That just seems to be the topic of the year.
Just 1 year from now.
Yeah, a year from now.
So a year from now, the only change that I would expect to see a year from now is an administrative change to allow New York City to issue variances of the multiple dwelling law, right?
So that there will be some flexibility.
So that they can then New York City then can issue the existing buildings code. I would love to see that happen within the next year because that's going to make everybody's
right now their hands are tied.
Their hands are tied, right? They can't. If you have a multiple dwelling, New York City can't do anything for you. The only thing they can vary is the Office of the Office of Residential Conversions, Article 7B, right? Section 277. That's it. So there's tens of thousands of multiple dwellings in the city, all different kinds, converted dwellings,
Right.
Stuff that was built in the
SROs, you go
50s.
down
So, there's
hotels,
just
everything.
so many, right?
So many.
So, but the biggest problem with the New York State multiple dwelling law is that it's a state law. So
Right.
any city
Right,
with a
that's what I
million
just
people,
said.
Rochester,
Right.
Albany,
Right. Buffalo.
any changes that
Well,
go into that law.
we're looking at a couple of projects right
Yeah.
now up in New Paltz and Kingston that are
Yeah.
affordable housing. We're doing some code work for some of the clients, and part of that is you don't read the local code.
No.
Because they're under IBC. We're going to the multiple dwelling law,
That's right.
and we're still using, a book that started
Yeah,
way
multiple dwelling law and the 1938 building code where it's not covered by the multiple dwelling law. That's the standard, right, that we've been following.
without a doubt. So the good news is you get to come back in a year from now.
Sweet.
And we will hopefully we'll have you on the show before then because I'm sure
Yeah,
there'll be
awesome.
other topics for us to talk about. But thank you for making the trip.
Yeah,
thank you
loved
for
it.
being part of
It's
the
nice to
design
be up here
family.
again for a little
yeah,
while,
and
yeah.
I'm sure everybody wants to see you. But now we got to get you back and get you over to LaGuardia or JFK to get your flight back home.
Yeah, no worries.
Pleasure.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sister.
Tony.